vision in our country. And we scheduled this, a couple months ago. It wasn't necessarily specifically timed for where we're at today, but it's relevant to where we are today. And so, in the next hour, we're going to look at how do we truly successfully navigate difficult conversations, leverage the different styles of communication, and perhaps even, I would add to that, the values and beliefs that might be different than ours. There are ways to have these conversations without having them explode into or devolve into something not effective. The picture here represents someone who you don't get along with, or perhaps here's your icebreaker question. I'm going to have you put it into chat. Who is the most difficult person you've ever had to communicate with? Now, I don't want the names. Let's change the names to protect the guilty. Maybe it could be a former boss, whatever. It could even be your own child. At some points in times, my own child has been one of them, has been the most difficult person to communicate with. And so when you think about who's the most difficult person, also think about what made them so difficult to communicate with. What was challenging about that? Were they headstrong, right? Were they opinionated? What made it particularly challenging when you look at communicating with someone? So I see in the chat someone who's perhaps disgruntled, someone who won't listen. Isn't that the truth? And um, constant interruptions. They don't listen to understand, right? They listen to respond. And listening is half the battle in communication. Wouldn't you agree? Like you can't communicate if I'm not listening to you or you're not listening to me. And so the challenge becomes what gets in the way of really effective communication, right? The people who don't like change, people who are not open to new ideas, even their lack of self-awareness. In fact, and the difference of opinion we had with my spouse this morning was really about should an election be called before all the votes are counted. Like, okay, well, he's a logical mathematician kind of guy, and I have, my degrees in psychology and organizational leadership. I'm the people kind of person, and emotion, I think, is an important part of any conflict or any disagreement. And so we'll talk about how do you manage that, and really how communication gets derailed. So I had you put it in the chat. People who don't like change, the most difficult person you've ever had to deal with. And additionally, and so you've put into chat here, what are some causes for communication derailment, right? We have a train here that derailed. And what are some of the causes of communication derailment? We already have some in mind here in chat with your self-awareness and ability to listen. And I'm going to give a shout out to a resource. It's called Your Style Under Stress. And it's by a company called Vital Smarts. And they published the book, uh, Crucial Conversations, which is a assessment and um, program I'm certified in. So I'm taking some of this idea from this concept of how do we deal with communication under stress. I'll put their website in there for you, and you could just search for Style Under Stress. What's interesting is as we look at people under stress, often there's just two directions we go, according to Vital Smarts and the book Crucial Conversations, right? Is people will withdraw and move towards silence and disengage as their way of not dealing with the conflict. And then there's the other perspective is people move towards violence, which, and I don't necessarily mean violence that you're going to beat someone up or you're going to have a riot, but clearly we know that's sometimes true. But in the context of interpersonal communication, that violence represents aggression, name calling, um, manipulation. And so aggressive or violent type tendencies are behaviors that tend to be in your face and aggressive. So when you think about your style under stress, And I'd be curious, how would you classify yourself? And of course, each one is kind of a spectrum, but what do you tend to do? Do you personally tend to withdraw, or do you tend to get a little more aggressive when you're under stress or in a difficult conversation? Food for thought. You don't necessarily have to put that into chat, but I would encourage you to go to the website and look up that style under stress. It's free, and I don't even think you have to create a profile or anything. You can just take that assessment. It's really interesting to give you some food for thought. So as we move forward, one of the things to consider is this concept called the ladder of inference. Now, the ladder of inference has been around. Put it in the chat if you've ever heard of the ladder of inference before. Some people have, some people haven't. And the ladder of inference was actually created by a gentleman. His name is Chris Argyris. It was back in the 70s that he started coming up with this concept. And one of the interesting perspectives on this ladder of inference is where we start. Okay, I'm going to circle it on the bottom. It's this green button, or this green concept says we start with observable data and life experience, perhaps. So what are we experiencing? What are we seeing? And then what do we do with that? We select data from what we observe. We add meaning to that. So let me share a story that I often share when I'm teaching this content. Is way back when I was a teenager. I was in college, had one of my first jobs, and I had a great relationship with my manager. And then at one point, I started showing up late to work, and he didn't say anything. He just kind of raised his eyebrows. He looked at me and didn't say anything. And then I showed up late to work again because his lack of response told me what? It was okay if I was late to work. Right. And so when I'm 17, 18 years old, right? That's my data set. And so my observable data was I show up late, I'm not in trouble, it's okay. So that's how me as an employee added meaning. But I do want you to put this in the chat. Put yourself in the manager's shoes. You have an employee who shows up late regularly, because then I continued that behavior, and I was not only just 5 minutes late, then I'd be 10 minutes late, 15 minutes late. Put it in the chat. What do you think? What's the meaning, for example, that someone would add to that behavior? It's okay. You won't hurt my feelings. If you put it into chat, what do you think? What do managers think of people who are late? That Thanks, Elizabeth. They think that work is not important to them, right? To that employee, right? They make assumptions about the meaning, right? So, what's the data? Right. Could be, thanks, Kat. They're disrespectful. They don't respect me as the boss. They don't respect the team. The rules don't apply to them. They're somehow special, right? And so you can see essentially there's me over here. I have my own ladder of inference based on his behavior. And then there's my manager. I'll just say you, right? There's you on that side. And sorry, my little writing with my finger looks really young. But anyway, we each both have our ladder of inference, right? So, and we make assumptions based on what? The data we have. Yeah. And so when we think about the data set, I have one set of data that says he didn't call me, he didn't write me up, he just ignored my lateness, and he has another data set that I'm late for work. And same situation. But then what happens in this ladder is we start to draw conclusions and adopt beliefs. We have this belief, oh, that employee is lazy, right? That's really just a story. We don't have any data besides they're late. And then sometimes we take actions based on our beliefs. So let me continue the story here. So I'm late. I show up to work, and this is the Crucial Conversations model, actually, that is built on that concept of the ladder of inference. Here's what we see. We start with what we see and hear. So as we say, we have my side of the story and the other side of the story. But we start with here's what I see and hear, and then we tell ourselves a story. Ah, it's okay to be late. And I feel pretty relieved as an employee, like, cool, that's awesome. That way I can do what I want to do, right? And then what do I do? What is my action? I continue being late because I was never called on the carpet. But then the manager, that's a whole nother conversation, right? The manager is going to make up his own mind, his or her own mind. In this case, it was a man. And, but that really isn't relevant to the conversation. He sees me late. He tells himself I'm disrespectful. The rules don't apply to me. I'm selfish. I'm a college student that drinks too much. Who knows what? And put it into chat. How is that manager feeling right now about my situation, about dealing with this employee who's late? Put it into chat. What are some of the feelings that this manager might have about his employee that's showing up late all the time? Because as we talked about at the beginning, emotions play a huge part in the conflict, right? People get angry. People get, if we had a great relationship and now am I taking advantage of him? Is he angry? He's thinks, yeah, he's frustrated, he's disappointed, um, annoyed, irritated. And that's exactly what he was. Because one day I come into work late again, right? Because that's the data set I was working from, that it was okay. And he is standing outside. It was Farrell's ice cream parlor here in Fashion Valley when it was there. Now it's a parking lot. But so I'm in my uniform. I drive up and I park and I see my manager standing outside of the restaurant, arms crossed, angry. He is clearly lost it. He's so angry he can't even contain himself. His body language was screaming that he was really angry. And so all of the emotions that you're putting in the chat there, absolutely. Yeah, he was feeling all of those. And I parked and I saw him and I thought, you know what? I've probably lost my job. And should I just back up and drive away and not face the music? But I kind of wanted that job still, even though it was just a waitress job. And so I decided to get out of my car and face the music. I walk up to the restaurant and I know I must have been 20 feet from him and he starts yelling at me. And because he just went totally from here's what's going on, here's the data I see. He's told himself a story. He's now sorry angry, right? So angry he can't contain it, and now he's just going to act out. He read me the riot app, up one side down the other, saying all sorts of stuff like you're like the stuff you put in here, you're lazy, you're disrespectful, you're this, you're that. And he just went off, totally went off on me. And I took it and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, so do you have my final check in your pocket? Am I fired? What's the story? And he didn't fire me, interestingly. I guess he still had a little bit of hope. But he says to me, I said, so what do I do? Am I fired? Do I leave? He says, nah, go clock in. All right. I thought, okay, let me clock in. And I also knew, though, that it was important for me to um, have a conversation with him, right? To be able to help him understand what was going on because there was something very significant going on in my life and he needed to know about it. And it was so significant, so painful that um, I didn't want to talk to anyone about it. So I didn't. I withdrew, thinking that silence or violence spectrum. I was feeling under stress. I withdrew. I didn't want to engage and have this conversation. Granted, I was 17, 18 years old, but these behaviors go throughout our lives. So when you think about your behavior and or an employee or a team member or a family member, this is very common behavior. They will either act out or they will withdraw. He chose to act out while I was withdrawing. And so it helps to really analyze the situation. I sat him down so I work my shift. I kind of duck and cover the entire shift. I try to avoid him and avoid my colleagues, and I just did my job. But at the end of the night, I sat him down and I said, okay, I need to let you know what's going on because there's something really important going on that's contributing to my being late, besides the fact that I thought, the message I got was that it's okay. So I said, about a year ago, my brother was diagnosed with cancer, my oldest brother, and he was given a year to live. It was 10 months into his diagnosis, and he literally was on his deathbed. And I would go to the hospital to see him before I went to work. And my father, how dads are, he said, you got to go to work. Life goes on. You can come visit, spend your time with him, and when it's time to go to work, go to work. So I would end up going to work late. Very significant and perhaps justifiable reason to be late if my boss had known what was actually going on, which I didn't communicate with him. But it helps to really analyze, the data set, the story we tell ourselves, the emotion we're feeling, and how that leads to action. How often, though, do people not, right? People often go from facts to action. They skip the whole analysis part of what's really going on in this situation. So when we look at facts, facts are facts, simple, right? Uh, the indisputable data, the objective data, the behavioral data we had is I was late. That was the only data set he had. He had nothing else. He made up the other story, which is what we do, right? We see behavior, we see data, we see action, and we make assumptions about that. That's what gets us into trouble. And the hard part is, how do we have a conversation? How do we call someone on these facts if we don't have a process with which to do so? Because oftentimes what we end up doing is telling our story, which is laden with judgment, accusation, emotion, and we don't focus on just the facts. Food for thought. So as we move forward, there are some better approaches, right? What we do is we look at surgical analysis and use that as a tool for communication. So, for example, here's the fact, here's what I had seen, here's what I saw, here's what it made me think, here's how it made me feel, and here's the action, what it makes me want to do, or hopefully you're having this conversation before you blow up at someone, right? Before you have a very unconstructive conversation or an angry altercation, right? So if you use this tool, this ladder of inference, essentially as a tool to have a better conversation, you can have a better conversation by breaking it down into step by step. And what's interesting is when you're telling it as this is my story, this is my understanding, here's the facts that I have, you're late, here's what it makes me think. It makes me think that you don't want your job anymore, that you don't care anymore. It makes me feel pretty disappointed in you or angry or whatever feeling you are feeling. And it makes me want to fire you, want to yell at you in the parking lot. Who knows? Not that someone would say that, right? But if you use this as a tool, this ladder of inference, you could then say, am I missing something? Is there something else that we can do? Help me understand what's going on with you? What's their situation? And when you ask open-ended questions like, help me understand, am I missing something, is a closed-ended question, but it's a very purposeful closed-ended question. It leads you to, yeah, did I tell you my brother's dying? Did I tell you, we're about to lose our house because of finances? Whatever might be going on. At least that closed-ended question can open up some conversation. Am I missing something? At least opens the door to conversation. And so when we start to look at the tools of communication, once we open that door to conversation, it's really important that we use good listening skills. And that was something that came up at the very beginning of the webinars to say what causes conflict is when people aren't listening, right? When people perhaps have their own agenda. So when you look at active listening, and active listening, put it in the chat. How many of you have had a class or practiced the skill of active listening? And if you don't, or perhaps if you do, how difficult or easy is active listening? Because truly, active listening, and Stephen Covey used to say this, he would say, you need to seek first to understand, right? That's habit 5 of the 7 habits of highly effective people is seek first to understand. And that means it's not about you, it's about them. It can't be about this whole story you've told. Yes, that's your story. But if you truly want to understand and communicate and have a better constructive conversation that might get you to a better result, you need to stop and listen. And thanks, Denise. I appreciate your honesty. It is so hard. What makes it so hard, Denise? I would love to have you put that into chat. It is really hard. Why? I have my thoughts on that. And because active listening, it takes practice, right? First of all, it's takes some patience. Definitely. Thanks, Michelle. And what's interesting is in my opinion, it's hard because we have to get out of our own way. We have to acknowledge the fact that, yep, it's not about us, right? It's about them. And that is hard to release that control, that power, your insights. Um, but one of the best strategies is to simply rephrase what that individual has said. And as you're rephrasing, you think about that for truly to understand what their perspective is, right? And the challenge is if we don't like their perspective, if we disagree with their politics, whatever, their values and belief, and that's in my opinion, and I've done diversity, equity, and inclusion training for many, many years. Yes, even as a white girl, so to speak. Um, it the conflict comes down to a difference in values and beliefs often, or simply not taking the time to understand what's going on in that person's life. If my manager at any point in time had said, "Hey, I've noticed you're late. You're starting to be late and you didn't used to be. Is there something going on? Help me understand." He could have had that long before the blow up in the parking lot and probably would have had a better um, end result. Yeah. And yes, thanks, Michelle. I'm not going to take the bait on that one because I could go on. That's a whole nother workshop. Learning patience and not responding to a narcissist. That can be hard. I was married to one for almost 20 years, right? So when we look at the skill of active listening and rephrasing, what we want to rephrase to simply to clarify our understanding. And by rephrasing, we get more information and it helps us move to the answer of understanding. So, for example, I'll have a short story to this one. When my son was in high school, I picked him up in the minivan, and he stomps like really hard, stomps to the car. He was obviously pissed off. Pardon me. He's obviously angry, and he wanted everyone to know it. He opens the door to the minivan and he throws his backpack on the floor of the van and slams the door and sits down. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, okay, what's going on? So I used that simple skill of active listening. I said, so I didn't say, "Hey, how was your day, honey?" No, I kind of knew how his day was. What I don't know what was causing him to be so angry. So I simply said, "What's going on?" And he spouts off, "Well, most teachers are so stupid." Okay, so now I know it's an issue with a teacher, not another student. And I said, "So you have a conflict with a teacher?" So I'm rephrasing, and every time I do, he tells me a little bit more. He says, "Yeah, it was the band director," and then it's really a skill, and it takes that practice to just reflect and say, okay, so now it's a conflict with the teacher, the band director, and we went on, and all I did was rephrase what he said, but every time I did, he gave me a little bit more. And then that actually ended up getting us to discussing what are some ways he could fix that situation in the future. Um, and so the next slide here is quite simply some examples of paraphrasing, and I have to have a caution here, a caveat. Some of this, you have to be careful not to have it sound scripted. When you're seeking to listen effectively, you really want to listen with the intent to understand, not with the intent to reply. You are going to say things to elicit more conversation and to share with that person that you're actually listening, right? You can say, "Oh, yeah, I'm listening." Man, not always. If you say, "So you're really upset about this situation, right?" So if you can say things like what I'm hearing you say is that you and your band director have had some sort of conflict. Is that right? Yeah. And then they tell you a little bit more. And whenever you're paraphrasing, it's important for you to pay attention to the feeling, especially the emotion that they're feeling. So if they're feeling angry and frustrated, when you acknowledge that, it helps it dissipate. It helps it really, um, it helps them feel heard. Because if people don't feel heard, they keep escalating in their anger or frustration or whatever that emotion is, right? They don't feel heard, the emotions escalate. When someone does feel heard, the emotions dissipate. And that's the hard part is you as the person listening not to get caught up in the emotion. When we get caught up in the emotion and start taking that on, the whole situation escalates. If you're simply trying to listen and understand how they're feeling, you need to mirror that. You need to say, "Wow, you're really frustrated, aren't you?" And they, "Yeah, I am." They feel heard, and um, then you can move on, right? So here's a quick um, and and Katie, I'm not sure if we have this. Do we have the capacity for breakout sessions, Katie?
Yes, we do.
Yay, good. Because here's what I'd like to do. Um, if you're all game with this, put it into chat. If you're game to do a quick breakout session with an active listening exercise. Yeah, you game? Yes, sure. Because you can hear me, listen to me chat all day long, but having the chance to have a conversation maybe about that ladder of inference. And in that ladder of inference, the most crucial part of that to have a constructive conversation is that story you're telling and the emotion you're feeling. So, what we're going to do, Katie, I'm going to have you break them into just simply, we have 16 people. We'll do groups of two. That way, you can have a little more focus on that. And so, what I want you to do, I want you to think about an issue you're currently facing in the workplace that you'd like to discuss with your partner. Each person is going to have a chance to discuss the issue. Um, we can give you about 5 minutes each. We'll give you 9 or 10 minutes for the breakout session. And I want you to, and we will send a message when the 5 minutes up and it's time to switch roles. And Katie could do that, but also perhaps assign a timekeeper between the two of you. So essentially, what I want you to do is share a current challenging situation that you're facing. You have to figure out who's going to go first. You have 5 minutes to just simply share your experience. What's a crucial situation you're facing? Whoever's the listener, try practicing this active listening. Seek first just to understand. Don't try and jump in with your agenda. Oh, yeah, I had a situation just like that. Let me tell you my situation. No, All you're going to do is listen to that person. You only have 5 minutes, and then we'll turn the tables, give the other person 5 minutes. So you each get a chance to share your situation and practice your active listening. When you come back, we'll debrief that, and then we'll go into some action planning. So, Katie, I'll turn it over to you for breakout sessions. Do duos, if you would, please.
All right, so I will do that now. You'll see a little notification for you to accept that breakout room. And then just go ahead and click accept, and then we'll message you when it's time to come back. And the system will kind of pull you back to this main room when we're done. All right, so bear with me. So we're slowly opening up those rooms right now.
And you inadvertently put me in one. Is there?
You can deny. Yep.
Yeah.
So you and I will stay back, Maureen.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
But make sure whoever I was partnered with has a partner. And if you need to, you can do a group of 3.
Yeah, I'll move Kat to room 5. There we go.
Thank you. Did you guys have a class on facilitating online, or have you just kind of figured it out as you went?
We've been learning from each other and doing a lot of practice sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so it looks like everyone's pretty much paired up. Oh,
Denise.
Denise.
Neil.
Did you get a notification, Denise?
They're both muted.
Oh, there we go.
And Tennille?
Tennille. Oh, yep. Perfect.
They're gone. Perfect.
Yep. So there's one room that has 3. Let me move Michelle. Oh, let's move Kat over to room 7. Oh, there. Perfect. Some folks have dropped off.
Yeah.
Because they're being forced to go into breakout rooms.
I know, right?
It happens. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
They weren't prepared for it.
A couple of people dropped off. Or was there more?
Yeah, we were at 18 and then it went down to 14 when we were breaking folks out. So that's all right.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. That's fine. Cool. Because what I was going to say is I do a train the trainer on how to facilitate live online. That with all the stuff you guys are doing, that might be a good thing to do with the chamber. Offer a Cliff Notes version of it, perhaps.
Sure, I'd love to do a practice session with you if you like. Happy to do that.
Yeah. Shelby's here now.
Hi, Shelby. Sorry about that. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I think I got booted out of my breakout room.
Sorry about that. You were alone in your breakout room, so I was just gonna have you join another room with 2 other folks. Would that be okay?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay. I'll send you back to room 2.
Okay.
With Jazz.
Okay.
Let's see here. Oh. Is it asking you to move? Let me see.
Not seeing anything yet.
Okay.
Oh, here we go.
Okay, I'm gonna move you to room 2. There we go.
Okay.
Okay. Oh.
And we're probably at, she's back.
Oh. That's weird. Sorry about that. Let's see.
That's all right. Let's see. So it says that I've been assigned to room 2.
Yep.
Should I go ahead and try that again?
Yep, that's the one. Okay. Perfect.
And I think we have about 5 minutes left.
I'll set an alarm.
Yeah. And you might want to send a message to all groups that they have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
There's a high-pitched sound in your background.
It's my laptop. It has this humming sound, and I always get that issue. And also,
Huh.
my neighbor is like sawing something. Good thing I'm not talking the entire time. I'll just keep myself on mute.
Right? Yeah, you can't always control the world around you, huh?
Hi there, Eileen. Are you just joining in just now?
Are they wrapping up? They probably should be wrapping up if you want to give them a
Okay.
1-minute warning.
I'm not sure if Eileen came from a breakout room or if she just joined the meeting. Eileen, if you're listening, we are just conducting some breakout rooms for an exercise, and then we will convene with the webinar in just a minute. Okay, Maureen, I'm giving them 60 seconds to come back.
Okay.
Do you still hear that humming?
Yep.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right, welcome back. And put it in the chat that you're back and you're here, present and accounted for. And you can either unmute and say something, or you can just put it in the chat. What are your thoughts about that ladder of inference and the tool of active listening? How can that be a tool for you with constructive conversations? It's pairing the two together, that ladder of inference and the tool of active listening. Thanks for saying you're here, Elizabeth, Michelle, Shelby, fantastic. So what are your thoughts? You can unmute yourself and share about your conversation or put it into chat. I think a lot of people sometimes wonder why active listening is covered so much in a course on constructive conversations, which is why it's important to put it together with that ladder of inference. And really that, what I like to say is that surgical analysis of how you're feeling. Go for it. I think I heard someone unmute.
Maureen, it's Kat. I'll go. I mean, I think active listening is so important just because if you're not listening and you're waiting to just speak, you so often miss out on the important things that's being communicated to you. And I think when you ask the right questions, it really kind of gives you a platform to be able to learn what's going on instead of just really thinking and waiting about what you're going to be able to say and share in the conversation. I got to speak with Michelle, and it was great to learn a ton from her and about her and just, you know, about you and the organization. And it was amazing. So I really enjoyed that opportunity to be able to chat with her.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kat. And thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Thoughts or comments? Thanks, Elizabeth. Excellent.
Hi there. If I could add in, this is Shelby. So I think that really what active listening helps with is what we had talked about with kind of our frame of reference and what we know and what we believe. And so if we have different beliefs and, you know, different frames of references, being able to talk about it and actively hear that other person can sometimes make those beliefs, you know, fit a little bit better.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well said. Well said. I appreciate that. And Elizabeth, I love your comment. In fact, your comment, Elizabeth, reminds me that there's a caveat to active listening, or here's your cautionary tale about active listening. And you said it perfectly in chat, which is in rephrasing, it helped you see something from a new perspective yourself. And perhaps that's part of the rub. That's part of the challenge is, what if it changes your thinking? What if it provides new insight? Are you okay with that? And I think sometimes people don't want to listen because it might change their thinking. It might change their perspective, which to me, that's all about how you connect with someone else, is by listening and hearing their perspective. But that's also a fear, right? Thank you for that. Anyone else? Final thoughts? Or not final thoughts, but thoughts on active listening and that ladder of reference. All right, and feel free to put that in chat as we continue on, because I know we're going to wrap up in about 9 minutes or so. And so here I have 10 steps to positive communication. And here's the first 5, quite simply, is think first. Think and analyze your story, right? So you can separate that fact from fiction. So often we have the facts, and then there's the fiction, the story we made up about that situation. Listen intently, listen actively. And that simple act of rephrasing um, helps uncover and validate what that person is saying. And as Elizabeth put into chat there, might give you some new perspectives on that situation. Here's the thing, be proactive. Thinking about my manager that wasn't proactive, he waited till he couldn't take it anymore and he blew up. Classic. It's classic for people who don't necessarily know how to have a constructive conversation is they wait till they can't take it anymore and then they lose it. So instead of waiting till you lose it, never works out well. Be proactive and have a clear conversation, have a clear message. And perhaps it's just simply you want to start with saying something like, can we have a conversation? It might be a little bit awkward. It frames it up. And here's the other caution is this tool of constructive conversations. The other person does have to be willing to have a conversation. If they're so bullheaded and stubborn and set in their ways, that's another conversation that perhaps we could have separately, right? When you're communicating, communicate with complete thoughts. Here's a tip. This is one of my favorite tips. It's been my pet peeve lately, especially with all the virtual communication. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about it. What is this? What is that? What is it? Take those words out of your language and replace them with what is this? Let's talk about being late. Let's talk about this conflict we have. But be more clear and communicate with complete thoughts. And here's a few more C's, if you would. So be compelling, be concise, be courteous, be respectful, right? Be appropriate and really seek to build up relationship instead of breaking it down. So I'd give you a quick action plan. Put it into chat. What are some takeaways from our time together today about having more clear communication, kind of doing that surgical analysis of a situation so that you can separate fact from fiction, whether it be the tools of active listening? What's one thing that you might be able to really take to heart and start to work on in your own life and in your own relationships? If you put that into chat, or if you want to unmute and share what perhaps was been helpful for you today, I would love that. Because otherwise, if you think about your time spent in learning and development and taking webinars and classes and so forth, it's an investment in your time. And so I appreciate you giving me the last hour of your life. And my hope and desire is that you'll be able to take a nugget or two or three that you could then implement and put into action for you. So I love that. Thanks, Katie. Putting that into paraphrasing feelings, seeking to understand and being proactive, and perhaps practicing that art of active listening, and do so with the intent to be genuine and connected, not scripted. And thank you, Shelby. I appreciate that. And so if you're interested, I do have a handout that summarizes all of this. If you're okay with, I can email that to you. Katie, perhaps you can give me their contact info and I'll email you the handout. And if you have any further questions or would like to chat separately on how we could perhaps help you or help your team, would be happy to do that. And I'll put my email into chat there. And if I spell it right, let's see. So yeah, reflect, actively listen, connect with others, build up relationships, don't break them down. And I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to Katie.